From the world of AV programming and control with James King, I'm Steve Greenblatt, and this is Ask the Programmer. Hey, James, how are you today? It's good to be back with you.
Oh, it's great to be back with you, Steve, and I'm doing good. Yourself?
I'm doing well. I always enjoy these talks, and I know we talk about this a lot. It's great when we have guests, but it's also good when you and I get a chance to talk out some different topic or idea. And what we came up with for today is um, how do we educate people, non-programmers, people outside the industry, maybe people within the industry in different roles, about the challenges of programming and what goes into successful programming. So it sounds like a bit of a complex topic, and if it wasn't, then we wouldn't be talking about it. But it's something I think that's important. Where do we start when we try to explain programming to somebody other than writing code, and which I think is the obvious part, but where do we start with trying to explain what are some of the challenges that we face when we're trying to do programming for an AV system?
I would say probably one of the biggest challenges, I would say, in at least my realm, is what we actually do. Members know, especially like our supervisors and stuff, they know we write code. Like they understand that part. But what is code? What are how is that measured? And how can a manager or supervisor or salesperson understand the pain point of a programmer? Because they don't understand what we are doing and what it entails for us to write code, to make equipment talk to each other, and to say on the latest and greatest platforms or patches and all that stuff. I mean, some people say it's just a bunch of line of code, but it's knowing how that line of code works.
That's a really good point. And it's very different what we do in the AV world when it comes to writing code to what software developers do, or what you think of when you think of people that are programmers outside this industry. I think there's a lot more factors and a lot more variables and a lot less control, I think, or no pun intended, over our environment when we're writing code for AV. A lot of that is trying to understand how to make equipment work. As you mentioned, one of the challenges is talking to the equipment. The other is deciding what you want the system to actually do. And I've heard that referred to as business logic. It's not necessarily looking at the specifics of the equipment, but understanding the functions and the operation and the user experience that we're trying to create. And frankly, the user interface is another ball game. It's that's can be a challenge in and of itself. The thing that I've thought that would be really helpful, even if you're not a programmer, if you could sit down and write down a description of what you want the system to do and take that to as granular a level as possible, that's the closest you're going to get to programming without actually understanding how to write the code, which quite honestly can be taught. It's that isn't always the challenging part. It's getting to the point of actually writing the code and knowing what it is that we're doing, and being able to define and address all of the variables to make everything work together is, to me, I think, is the big challenge.
Yeah, and like the one benefit, if you're looking at I guess software developer, is a lot of their software is geared for one, maybe two pieces of hardware. So if you're writing a Windows application, that's what you're writing it for. It's for Windows. But when we're looking at our AV control system, is you might have company Y's touch panel, you might have company Z's DSP, and company X display. Like you have to. It's not just like, okay, you're in a controlled environment. Your environment is always changing because that display may get changed out or the DSP might get changed out, but you still got to make all the pieces work together.
And I think that that's the integration that is what makes what we do so important, and why programming is so vital in that. I think that, and you probably share this, is that we can get very defensive when people talk about that programming isn't necessary, or what we do is going to be obsolete, or is not, it is not a critical part of a system, because of what you just mentioned, that this is where the magic happens. It's taking pieces of equipment that aren't supposed to work together and making them work together and talk to each other, and creating this experience that the operator of the system, the user, doesn't need to know what's going on behind the curtain.
Yeah, the user doesn't need to know. Like you think about it, is take a car for example. You as a user, we sit in our car, we turn the ignition or hit the button to turn the car on. As a user, I don't care that is it electric or is it gas? I don't care. I don't care using this as a, because yeah, some people prefer electric over gas, but I'm more like, I'm in my car. I can care less if it's electric or gas. I can care less that is it a 4 cycle, 6, 8 cycle piston engine. Is the oil getting there? Is the oil getting there correctly? Is the timing belt moving? Is the water pump? Like all of those variables, as we talk, as a user, I don't care. I just want my car to work and get me from point A to point B. And that's where programmers with our EV system go, is we allow our users to go from point A to point B in their communication, either a Zoom call or a presentation or whatever that's going on, without them worrying about, well, okay, is the DSP set correctly? Is the amplifier set the right? Like we simplify it by being complex.
Which is always the case. So, somebody has to do the heavy lifting, as I like to say. It's and to your point, it's also about managing the parameters, and not allowing a user to do something that's going to, quote unquote, get them in trouble. So we try to control the experience so that they are going to operate things the way they should be operated, and not do something that's going to cause the system to not respond the way it needs to, or is going to cause maybe some unpredictable responses. Um,
Oh, 100%. Like I kind of think of it. I was talking to a friend of mine who's was an engineer. I haven't talked to him in years, so I don't know if he still is. But he was saying what they teach engineers, and like structural engineer, is they don't design structures to last. They actually design them to break. And the reason why is so they can control the breaking point. Yes, you have things that happen and that aren't planned. But take a bridge, for example, is if you can say this bridge can only hold X amount of weight, you can design it to hold that amount of weight. Instead of going, well, we don't know how much weight it's going to come across this bridge, so let's just keep blowing, like putting more and more on it, when it may only be like a 2 car going across it, or a jumbo jet. Like it could be completely different. But if we know, if we control that breaking point, we can say, well, you can only have 35,000 tons go across this bridge. Because then you know anything over that, it's going to cause failure. And we kind of do that with our EV systems. We lock it down so our users don't break it. So we control that breaking point. Yes, it will be variables that happen, outliers that, our system breaks and we have to fix it. But if we control a lot of those tasks that we know, that whole 80-20 rule, like if we control that 80%, then we only have to be worry about the 20% instead of the whole 100%.
That's a really good point. And it comes down to what are the majority of the users need? And yes, you can have more operation and more complexities, but we don't expose that to the everyday person. The other thing I wanted to talk about related that I think is important to understand is that the programming that we do in AV is it needs to be designed to change. And that's a little bit different than programming in other industries and in other areas. And even during the development, we find changes, but certainly afterward. And there's one thing to say you're going to do updates or upgrades, but in AV, there's you need to build in the ability to make changes without having to redesign or reprogram or cause different failures or issues down the road. Yeah, I mean that's the way I've always looked at it, because we're bound to need to make adjustments for different users. We're bound to be putting in different equipment, and there's just it's inherent that these systems change.
Yes, that is great. We have to be flexible as we can while still controlling the 80% that we can control.
Yeah, it's a little bit different than when you're talking about software deployment. Back to what you said earlier, when you're writing on a platform in modern programming and mainstream software development, you know what you're working with, and there's a very defined scope, and that scope is what it is, and this is the solution that is built. Whereas in AV, that could be fluid if you don't control your parameters well. But then right after a system is put in, it's very likely that there's going to need to be adjustments and changes even within the first few months, because that's when the system gets used, and that's when the customization ends up getting applied, or the personalization gets. Whereas if you're writing a Windows application, you're appealing to the masses. There may be some bug reports or user requests, but that doesn't mean that they're getting done. And when they are, they're getting done in the next major release.
Yeah, that brings up a good point. If you think about it, and it makes me wonder, like, how this is almost backwards in the AV industry. If you look at software development and this Windows and stuff, you have software that says it runs on this system. That's it. It's designed to run on this system. Your system needs to meet these minimal requirements for the software to work. If you don't meet that, that's on you. But now in AV, it's the opposite. It's like, here's all our equipment. You need to make it work this way. And that equipment can change. And so it's no longer like, if you look at the software application, it's like the software is determining the hardware. It's now hardware is determining the software in AV. And that hardware can change at the whim of the user. So it's really a challenging concept for us AV programmers.
If you take it one step further, not only does the hardware change, but then the firmware changes. And as we've talked about before, when you're starting to get to more cloud-based products, that firmware may change without notice, which could really drastically adjust or impact the operation of a system, with making a programmer's life that much harder. I'm glad we're talking about this. I hope that our listeners really get some value out of it. And those of you that are programmers, definitely, I'm sure you're nodding your head and you're relating. And please add to this and help us. But one of the things that we like to do here on Ask the Programmer is make sure that um, we're educating those who are interested in learning more about programmers and programming, because it's important, because we all do need to work together. And one of the things that I think stemmed some of our earlier conversations were questions that were asked of us about what about this or that, or how do you give me more information, because I'm hearing different terms being discussed and I don't understand them. So that was where we came up with Ask the Programmer. So just to kind of come back around full circle after over 100 episodes, that this is where we're still at. And any additional thoughts there?
Additional thoughts, and I just thought of this just now, is if you're not a programmer and you're listening to this, our podcast, great. Appreciate that. It shows you that our programmers are a necessary skill and a necessary resource that you need to have on your team. But to kind of understand what we do is look at a simple hello world program, because any programmer always starts with hello world. And the reason why this crossed my mind is we are recording this on July 5th. Yesterday was July 4th. And yes, I'm in Vegas, and we all know about the MGM Sphere, Madison Square Garden. Sorry, not MGM, Madison Square Garden Sphere. And on July 3rd, they fired it up with a Hello World program. And then July 4th, they had a lot of different shows on the Sphere. Really cool stuff. You can find videos of it, but it was that whole Hello World that me as a programmer struck with me. And again, those are ways to understand what we do. We start with very basic of hello world, and then we get complicated.
Absolutely. I caught that as well. And I thought that was very comical and very appropriate. So and that's one of the things that bonds all programmers, as you mentioned. If you have to be able to do the basics, and then you use that as your stepping stone. James, how could people get in touch with you and learn more and keep this conversation going about programming, and let more people know about what AV makes AV programming special?
Oh, you can definitely check us out on Twitter. Our Twitter is AV Programmer Pod. So definitely follow that if you're not. My Twitter is AV_James King. I'm anywhere that HETMA's doing, higher ed AV. Again, you Google me, you'll find me.
Excellent. And continue also to use the Ask the Programmer hashtag as well, and whatever social media platforms you have. But yeah, please reach out to us. For me, you can reach me at Steve Greenblatt on social media. My company, Control Concepts, at controlconcepts.net, where you could find my contact information there. And we hope that you found this podcast and information valuable. And this might be a good one for those of you who are programmers in the listening audience to share with those who you work with. And maybe that'll help to expand our audience and get more people listening and interested in contributing to this conversation, because it is really our goal to create community and also build the voice for programmers in the industry. You can catch our show on YouTube as well as Apple and Google Podcasts. And we would, as always, appreciate feedback, a review, and also any outreach for suggestions on topics or guests. So please reach out to us, and we look forward to hearing from you. With that, this has been Ask the Programmer.